So I will talk about non-media coverage of natural risks. I will have a sociological point of view about this risk. As we've seen before, this risk concerns more and more houses. In particular with climate change. So it generates a lot of material and human damage, and a lot of people are concerned. This is a technical explanation of this risk, as we have seen before, and the damages. So, my question is why the risk of clay damage receives very little media coverage. For the media to raise awareness and prevent these risks, certain conditions must be met. One essential condition is that the media must choose to regularly cover natural risks. The number and frequency of articles on a topic are more important than the tone used, dramatic or factual, for raising awareness. Additionally, the media should provide in-depth coverage rather than just reporting news items. But paradoxically, the increase in natural hazards does not always lead to more in-depth articles. Although there are many media articles about fires, floods, hurricanes, but this is not true for all natural risks. For example, the consequences of clay shrinkage swelling receive little coverage. An analysis of articles in regional and national newspapers about clay hazards in Puy-de-Dôme shows only 28 articles in 2011 to 2013 and only 83 in 2018 to 2020. This is much lower than the number of articles about floods, which were 2,069 and 2,079, respectively, for the same periods. So there is a very little publicized risk, which is clay risk. There is only one exception: the publication of orders recognizing the state of natural disaster. On the 28 articles from 2011 to 2013, for example, the majority, 99.3%, talks about this theme, about the recognition of the state of natural disaster. This is often because municipality has failed for being recognized or had a request for recognition rejected. These articles show that when cause entrepreneurs address issues, journalists can produce in-depth articles on the risks, but it's not the principal type of articles. It is an exception. A second exception. This framing is far from trivial. It only allows a reduced, this framing, this one, is far from trivial. It only allows a reduced and superficial treatment of the problem. So, in particular, when we compare with the flood treatment by media. But so the problematic is why? Why clay hazard cause more and more numerous and significant damage to homes? Hundreds of thousands of people are affected. Significant economic impact, many stakeholders, a lot of significant disagreements, and this situation why this subject is not treated by media. This hazard generates relatively few press articles compared to other natural disasters. How can we explain the paradox? Why, in particular, is the clay risk not more often the subject of controversy in the public media space? These are the questions we need to address. There are more specific questions. For example, do we need spectacular images? Should a collective of reasons make a public complaint for better consideration of the consequences of this hazard? So, to answer these questions, we need data. We have interviewed journalists. We also interviewed technical service managers and also political responsible. So, to explore various factors influencing this situation, 4 categories of questions were asked during the interview. First set of questions assess the interview about their knowledge about clay risk. The second part focuses on the interview's work in the field and their interactions with other stakeholders. Third questions focus on prevention, responsibilities, responses to reimbursement requests, and last 4 questions focuses on communication and media coverage issues. For example, existing communication actions to inform the local population, what are the reasons for lack of communication actions, and who should implement them. So, the results. So, we are interviewed local journalists, TV, radio, and local press. Also, other stakeholders like associations. And finally, there are 4 causes: media causes, political causes, technical, and a lack of resources for victims' associations. First of all, media causes. The first reason, which is quite simple, is that the clay risk is less dramatic than other natural risks, like avalanches, which happen suddenly. The clay risk is not very exciting to cover from a journalistic point of view. Many articles on this topic lack images, and more than half of the images that are included are just for decoration. Only a few articles about disaster associations have photos of victims showing cracks in their houses. Similarly, 7.9% of articles about clay risks mention a personal story or focus on the human side of this disaster. In contrast, 40% of articles about floods do this. Or the press prefers stories with dramatic pictures, which is a disadvantage for covering clay risk. An association manager said, "We are more used to sensational reports. Journalists, look for something spectacular. Journalists want to know if there are any houses to photograph or cracks to show. They only say people are in trouble and that getting compensation is complicated." This observation is reminiscent of others, including that of Bennett, who sees in the dramatization of information about natural risks, it is a real journalistic norm. The dramatic nature of a risk is an important factor for its coverage. Bosk and Hildgartner see it as a reason why some social issues get media attention. This explains why risks that don't cause as much fear, excitement, or controversy are often left out. In other words, the clay risk doesn't attract readers as much as risks do. And this attraction is important for the financial success of the press. So, the clay shrinkage swelling hazard is less dramatic and harder to cover from a journalistic point of view. A journalist says, "It is harder to talk about this little-known risk if you are not personally affected. It is harder to understand and explain than, for example, a fire." There are also other media causes. For example, these hazards of clay are less noticeable. No journalist asked about the main natural risk in the Auvergne region and Puy-de-Dôme department. They now mention clay risk as a major issue, unlike floods, forest fires, storms, or avalanches. Most journalists say they are not aware of clay risk, even if they are covered it in some articles. Why it is the case? There are several reasons for the ignorance. The first reason relates to their views of Auvergne and Puy-de-Dôme. Their views of a region might be incomplete or wrong, which can lead to underestimating certain risks. Giacona, Martin, and Ecker found that journalists often link avalanches to high mountains. Even though this is not always true. This explains why avalanches in the Alpes get more media coverage than those in the Vosges. This relates to how territories are seen. Finally, territories are social constructs shaped by various authorities, including the media, which spread different ideas about them. Natural risks are part of these ideas. Another reason that journalists don't focus on clay shrinkage swelling is that they are more interested in other risks they've dealt with in their careers. For example, fires. A third reason for the lack of coverage is the availability heuristic. Psychologist Norbert Schwartz showed that people overestimate risks based on how easily they remember events. For example, people might think about flying is more dangerous than taking the train because plane crashes are more memorable even thought they are not actually more common. More dramatic, more memorable, natural hazards are seen as more likely to happen. Clay shrinkage swelling is less sudden, less intense, and striking compared to other natural risks, making it less memorable and harder for journalists to identify. Finally, as a radio journalist mentioned during our interview, this could lead to less coverage of clay risk in editorial meetings. Another reason is that the coverage of clay shrinkage swelling is mainly done by local journalists. These journalists know their local areas well, but they are not as specialized in the topics of shrinkage swelling because they cover a lot of subjects as journalists. General journalists believe they don't need to be experts in a topic. Instead, they focus on journalist skills like availability, speed, independence. They need to be able to cover any topic, especially when an important event happens. However, this lack of specialization has downsides. It means they have less knowledge about complex and technical risks like clay, shrinkage, swelling. And also, they have less familiarity with related actors and systems. In fact, many of these journalists have not scientific training before joining newsrooms. Non-specializations also makes it harder to access a variety of relevant sources. Building a network of reliable sources takes time and requires regular contact with stakeholders and deep knowledge of the subject. A well-developed network is valuable because it allows journalists to be more independent and produce more in-depth and varied coverage. Several journalists also mention difficulties in finding and accessing public sources. They often need to navigate multiple contacts and institutional hierarchy to get information. One journalist explains that when they try to cover a topic like clay risk, they often face obstacles, especially with state services. This makes it hard to get information and can slow down article production. In fact, if they don't have easy access to information of a good source, they tend to avoid the topic and choose other subjects instead. So, less specialized journalists also face professional and organizational challenges, especially in large regions. For example, a journalist from France Bleu Pays d'Auvergne, which is a local radio, explains the difficulty of covering natural risk in a large area like Auvergne, which only about 10 regular journalists. Editorial staff must make choices, which means natural risk topics, unless they are very important, may be covered less or not at all. Clay shrinkage swelling is particularly affected. Both Kahn and Garner point out that public attention is a rare resource that the allocation of which depends on a competition within a system of public arenas. This means that its use must be struggle to occupy space and media space. Competition is constant, must both fight to enter and to stay on the public agenda. This is the reason for why clay risk is not an important subject for local media. Journalists do not lack sources of information or alert systems. In Puy-de-Dôme, there are many affected communities and victims. However, this contradiction is not clear without considering the type of relationship journalists have with potential sources of information about clay risk. One category of sources includes people journalists frequently work with and call because they are available, responsible, and knowledge about natural hazards. These include firefighters, police officers, and NDS agents who repairs power lines. Journalists often use these contacts in their daily work, and they have established long-term relationships with them. However, these strong relationships do not help with clay shrinkage swelling risks because these official and professional sources are less involved with this type of hazard. They mainly deal with more immediate emergency, like fire or floods. So, this element reduces visibility and for journalists, it's difficult to talk about this subject for also this reason, lack of sources. There are also political causes. Even without journalists, in theory, other actors can promote environmental or social issues, including local elected officials. For example, the town of Cournon is heavily affected by clay shrinkage swelling. Between 2000 to 2020, it requested natural disaster recognition 30 times for these hazards and received it 4 times. However, the elected officials in Cournon do not actively communicate with their constituents about these issues. They also meet their legal obligations to inform the public, so through displays, websites, or municipal newspapers. They also provide support to associations for meetings, but they do not prioritize the issue in their local political actions. Informing the public is not the same as effective communication for raising risk. The contract to well inform the public is fulfilled when the information available is the most complete and accurate, while real communication depends when efforts are made to ensure the information reaches as many people as possible. And it's not the case. The situation is the lack of communication, partly due to also to some victims. An association leader mentioned that some victims fear that requesting recognition of natural disaster will lower their property values. This fear explains why there is a little interest in creating a public database of damaged homes in Puy-de-Dôme. It's true that this doesn't interest the victims. Based on the steps I've tried to implement, I have only 20% of people, victims, who have mobilized. They say, I don't see the point. Lambert, Clay, and Arnaud discussed an alliance among real estate agents, property owners, notaries, insurers, and sometimes city councillors to avoid a decline in neighborhood or municipal attractiveness. This situation explains why this topic is not a major focus for local politicians who aim to increase their audience and political capital. This selection of political agenda topics depend on constraints, benefits, and expected costs. And another reason is the lack of external political or social pressure to address the issue proactively. the natural risk of clay shrinkage drilling does not cause death, which reduces the immediate and political cost of managing it. Elected officials are expected to address risks that cause death, like floods and avalanches, but the absence of human victims makes it less urgent to deal with the consequences of the natural hazard. In Western societies, human life is a central value and an undeniable political principle. Human life is obviously an eminent value and deserves to be defended with all our strength. So, even significant and disabling human damage does not have the same weight in prioritizing problems. As a technical department head observed, the only thing that works for me is an event. Unfortunately, we've seen it in other territories. Elected officials, where there is a problem, set up an alert system. They no longer consider the cost. Unfortunately, that's how it is in France. I don't know anywhere else, but in France, we react. We do not act in advance. We react afterward. So, to be in few words, there are also technical and administrative causes. Experts hazards also monitored by several technical services like Water Cycle Department of Clermont Metropolis or BRGM or the Risk Prevention Service for the departmental territory. So there are a lot of services. These services are responsible for creating maps of clay areas and have enough statistical data and risk knowledge to inform the public about these issues. And we have questioned them about the attention they accord to communication in their mission. For them, it's not their role. This limited attention takes several forms. In fact, there are also a technical role to create maps, but they are not responsible and don't really want to work for the communication. Heads of technical services believe it is not their role to push for more preventive actions than those required by law. Additionally, these technical services lack communication expertise. They are experts in soil, water, and not in communication. Also, they have a technical point of view about communication. For them, the good communication is a scientific communication, focusing on knowledge transmission, rather than a broader communication strategy that considers public perception of risk and territory. So, all these combined reasons explain why these professionals are used a technical communication approach for natural risk without diversifying its content or broadening its scope. Finally, the victims themselves provide little information about this hazard, as not by leaders of victim advocacy group we interviewed. According to these leaders, victims rarely get involved in effort related to the issue because they fear that their property value might decrease. According to association leaders, some victims are also against seeking recognition of the natural disasters because they fear their property value decrease, or cause entrepreneurs are need to bring these issues into the public eyes either directly through dramatic actions or indirectly by pressuring officials. In other cases, for example, industrial risks caused entrepreneurs have taken their fight to court, which has increased media coverage of these issues. They can also provoke controversies, but in this case, in case of this risk, there was no really important controversy, and it's difficult for them to mediatize their action. So, to conclude, publicizing a controversy requires committed actors who actively promote the issue. However, several reasons explain why the stakeholders involved do make a significant or effective effort to highlight the issue as a public problem. From a journalistic perspective, the clay hazard causes damage that is not dramatic enough to warrant more extensive coverage beyond reporting on the orders that recognize natural disaster status for affected municipalities. From the perspective of local elected officials, this risk does not warrant priority attention. There is no strong push from constituents to make public claims, and sticking to the legal requirements for information helps avoid negative publicity for the municipality. For technical services responsible for mapping clay hazard areas, promoting prevention is not part of their role. These services believe risk communication should be precise, educational, and based on technical documents available to the public. Disaster victims associations struggle to get unanimous agreement from their members on publicizing the damage to their homes. Additionally, they are reluctant to challenge the current insurance practice for managing this risk. As a result, the clay risk is often seen as a technical issue rather than a political one. It is viewed as being caused by natural factors and requiring technical solutions, which are the responsibility of individuals rather than political leaders responsible for territorial planning. Thank you.